Good evening. My name is Megan Torrey. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the World Affairs Council of Connecticut, and it's such a pleasure to welcome everybody here tonight for this very special program with my esteemed colleague, Jim Falk, and Mr. Sung-Yoon Lee, the author of The Sister. We are certainly in for a treat tonight. I want to give a great shout out to all of the people that helped support this program, and in particular, the Asia Society of Texas, the Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations, and World Affairs Councils from around the country. You'll see there's so many on the screen. Now, no one came here to hear me speak. I really want to throw over the program to Jim. Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Megan. And let me express special thanks to you and your colleague, Abby Noyes, for helping to market the program. And Abby's back there producing it. So very, very grateful. And I've been looking forward to this program. And the fact that we have such a large audience certainly tells us a lot about how important this topic is and how interested people are in the subject. Our guest author tonight is indeed Dr. Sung-Yoon Lee. He, of course, the author of The Sister, a book that the Wall Street Journal in its review described as a riveting read. And I have to say, having read the book, I wholeheartedly agree. Dr. Lee is the Wilson International Competition Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. And his topic and his project there during this year, essentially sabbatical, is North Korea's provocation, peace ploys, propaganda, and unification policy. That's a lot, and I suspect many of your questions will be on some of these topics. And while we're speaking of questions, let me remind you that I like to work your questions into the conversation. So please put them in as soon as you have a question, not in the chat box if it's open, but in the question box so that I can keep track of them. Prior to joining the Wilson Center, Yoon taught Korean history at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which is, of course, part of Tufts University. And he received his master's and doctoral degrees at the Fletcher School. His writings on the Korean Peninsula have been published in many of major newspapers and periodicals, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc. And he's also been a witness before the House Foreign Relations Committee. And here's some exciting news. You may be able to see the story of The Sister on the big screen in maybe a year or two, because the producer, Scott Skeindorf, who was the director and producer of The Lincoln Lawyer, purchased the rights, the film rights, for this book. Very, very exciting, and says a lot about the book. So welcome, Soon. So glad to have you with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, Ms. Torrey. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Let me start by making a bizarre statement. I don't want to scare anyone away, but when you invoke the words North Korea, what comes to your mind? I think of Kim Jong-un. Actually, I think more of Kim Yo Jong, the sister these days. But when this North Korean dictator, quite young, not quite 40 years old, is such a powerful presence in our imagination, what kinds of images, what is your attitude toward this North Korean dictator? Does he strike you as charming? Probably not for many people around the world. Do you want to mock him? Maybe taunt him, make fun of him, perhaps. And I think that has implications. We tend to patronize the North Korean dictator. He's kind of funny looking, the cult of personality of the great leader, so-called. It's so excessive. It's a combination, an amalgam of medieval mores and buffoonish bellicosity. Sometimes they're just funny. They say crazy sounding things like they're going to nuke the White House. 10 years ago in 2013, North Korea made that threat explicitly. So our collective image of the North Korean dictator is a weird-looking, cruel despot presiding over a nation of hungry people, and we tend to patronize North Korea. When the Korean War broke out in June 1950, the Truman administration one senior State Department official coming out of the National Security Council meeting told reporters that the relationship between Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of the current leader, the relationship between Kim Il-sung or Stalin and Kim Il-sung is exactly the same as that between Walt Disney and Donald Duck. That is, Kim Il-sung is not his own person, not his own man. He is a creation, a puppet of the more powerful communist patron, Stalin. So we have, I think, through the years, decades, underestimated North Korea because, again, they're very strange, they're very weird, but they are not to be underestimated. Over the past 30 years of nuclear diplomacy vis-a-vis North Korea has wrested away from the US, from South Korea, Japan, China, Russia, the international community, at least $20 billion worth of blandishments, including cash, food, fuel, and so on. What has the other team, Team USA, and its allies gained? A nuclear North Korea with probably over 50 warheads. So we have to take the funny-looking North Korean despots seriously. And out of this macabre, male-dominated, weird, strange landscape has emerged a young, photogenic, female co-crime boss, a despotess, a nuclear despotess, as I referred to her in my humble book, because Kim Yo Jong, since 2022, has made several threats of preemptive nuclear strike on her nation's peaceful neighbor, South Korea, and she has emphasized that she has this authority and it's vested in her by her brother, the party, and her nation, the state. So when it comes to the 9 nuclear weapon states around the world, no other country comes even close, not even Russia or China, in terms of the absence, total absence of checks and balances in government.
Well, before let me interject because I want to get into a lot more detail about the sister. But before we do that, and thankfully you put in a family tree, which was very helpful. I'd like you to tell our audience, because I was really unaware of this, about how the family, the dynasty, claims its legitimacy. Let's start there.
Well, North Korea to this day claims that South Korea and the US started the Korean War. So they're prone to telling lies. And one of the biggest state lies on which the entire legitimacy of the dynasty rests is that Kim Il-sung, the founder, virtually single-handedly defeated Japan, Imperial Japan, in the Second World War. From 1910 to 1945, all of Korea was Japan's colony, and the Korean nation, people were deprived of sovereignty. And in the North Korean myth, Kim Il-sung, who indeed was a small-time guerrilla fighter, anti-Japanese fighter in the 1930s, who joined the Soviet army in late 1940, I mean, he was really, small-time soldier in the Soviet army, first in the Chinese Communist Party and then in the Soviet Russian Far Eastern Army. So they've, inflated, exaggerated this very small role of Kim Il-sung in fighting against Japan into this great myth that Kim Il-sung operated out of the camps on the foothills of this real majestic mountain called Mount Paektu. And therefore, you have this Mount Paektu mythology, Mount Paektu family. The North Koreans have argued that heroic blood, almost Superman kind of omnipotence, runs through the veins of the great leader, the original great leader, his son, Kim Jong-il, the late father of Kim Jong-un, and now down to the third generational dictator, Kim Jong-un. So it's a big lie, but thereupon rests the entire political legitimacy of the despotic dynasty that is North Korea.
Is it viewed as a royal family? I mean, are they referred to? I think in your book you speak about how Kim Yo is referred to as princess, at least when she was a child.
Yes, and she is the 7th and the youngest, the last child of Kim Jong-il, and by many accounts she was the favorite child, and both father and mother doted on her. referring to her, calling her as my sweet princess, and so on. I refer to her as a princess because although North Korea pretends to be a communist republic wherein gender equality and all kinds of rights are protected, the reality is it's a medieval absolute style dynasty. And we've had, father to son succession twice, and probably in the coming years, we'll see another hereditary succession if necessary.
Are there other siblings? Because there's Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo, and I believe there's an older boy or man now.
Yes, from the same mother, Ko Yong-hee, who passed away, who died in 2004. There were 3 children, Kim Jong-chol, who's the eldest child, a son, and then the second is Kim Jong-un, the current dictator, and the youngest is Kim Yo Jong. With 4 or 5 different women, Kim Jong-il fathered at least 7 children. One of them, the eldest son, called Kim Jong-nam, was murdered in broad daylight in a crowded international airport with a deadly chemical weapon. That was a brazen act, dramatic brazen act, telling the world this is what happens to you if you challenge me. This older half-brother, Kim Jong-nam, had come out against another father-to-son succession back in 2009, 2010. And there are probably other motives for Kim Jong-un to have committed this murderous, heinous murder in broad daylight, where you have infirm people in an international airport, cameras everywhere.
I remember the pictures.
Get coverage. Yeah. So, fratricide, avunculicide, killing of an uncle, nepoticide, killing of the nephew. I looked up these words in the dictionary. They're real. I mean, North Korean history is rife with such murderous acts.
But where's the older brother?
The older brother purportedly lives in Pyongyang. They had a family Japanese chef who worked for the father, for Kim Jong-il, for many years, and he became sort of a minor prophet when North Korea Kim Jong-il did anoint Kim Jong-un as his heir in 2009. This Japanese chef had been arguing that Kim Jong-un is the next leader, not the older brother, Kim Jong-chol. So Kim Jong-chol has shown no proclivity, no interest in politics or power. Apparently, he's a very cultivated amateur guitarist, very good. And he's been cited attending Eric Clapton shows in various cities around the world. With Kim Yo Jong back in 2009 in Singapore, but by then Kim Jong-un had been appointed as the heir apparent, so perhaps he was more cautious and did not join his siblings on that visit to Singapore.
Tell us about their education in Switzerland, because of course I think we all remember that Kim Jong-un was there, and I don't know for how long, but that his sister was too, was quite interesting.
That's right. And Kim Jong-chol was the first to be sent to Switzerland. And then his 2 younger siblings, Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo Jong, joined their older brother. Kim Jong-un and Kim Yo Jong lived in Switzerland for at least 4 years in the late 1990s, from about 1996 to 2000 or early 2001. According to US government officials, Kim Jong-un hardly ever studied. He often missed class, whereas Kim Yo Jong was quite smart and studious, and she speaks very good English, whereas her brother doesn't understand English at all. The reason that their father had his various children sent aboard, including the condemned eldest son, Kim Jong-nam, I actually happened to enroll at the International School of Geneva on the same day as Kim Jong-nam. He was 3 years younger, so we were never in the same class, but I saw him in the cafeteria every now and then. The reason that Kim Jong-il had his children sent abroad is in part due to because of the need to maintain this myth that the family is somehow super heroic, omnipotent, they have special powers. And of course, children see other children, even princes and princesses, as ordinary children, and they talk. So that was one reason, and I'm sure there were other reasons, getting a good education for his children. Nowadays, I think Kim Jong-un will find it exceedingly hard to send his own young children abroad to Switzerland or Russia or anywhere else. In this day and age of cell phones and Instagrams and so on, I think a lot of people would be willing to spy on or to try to spot the royal family abroad. So probably Kim Jong-un will refrain, but over the years, we've seen his father send his children abroad.
So when they were in school in Switzerland, did people know who they were, or did they have incognito? No. Were they incognito, and did they have bodyguards?
They have bodyguards, and I had a student about 15 years ago at the Fletcher School who was Kim Jong-chol's basketball coach at a school in Switzerland. And he told me that Kim Jong-chol, the son of Kim Jong-il, would come to school driven by his, quote, father and mother, and they would do a 90-degree Asian bow every time that their little son got out of the car. The adults would get out, and then they would bow very reverently to their son. Obviously, they were, employees. So, yes, they've had bodyguards, but when I was at the International School of Geneva, we had no idea, the South Koreans had no idea that Kim Jong-nam's father was the North Korean would-be next leader.
Let me remind our audience to please send in your questions, and if you can, please identify which council or organization that you're affiliated with. So back in North Korea, they attended school, and it was a class that was, I guess, for lack of a better word, certainly highly selective and handpicked.
Yes, the residents of Pyongyang, the capital city, end up being residents there, not by choice necessarily. You have in North Korea an insidious, very cruel political class. Every newborn is thrust into a political class, and you have only the top class, the loyal class, so-called in North Korean verbiage, who have the right, the privilege to live in Pyongyang. Even so, the residents of Pyongyang, the higher-ups, know that they know who the supreme leader's children are. So when Kim Yo Jong went to college, she was put in a special class of about 50 people. They had their own elevator in the school buildings. Normally, it was reserved for the professors, but of course, no professor would be willing to ride the elevator with the untouchable daughter or son of the supreme leader. So Kim Yo Jong and her brothers have lived the most extravagant, spoiled, pampered life. They've been treated like near gods and goddesses since they were very young. And that kind of arrogance and self-confidence she exuded, projected in abundance when Kim Yo Jong visited South Korea for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in February 2018. She had her chin up, usually, erect carriage, good posture. And when she entered the VIP lounge at the major international airport in South Korea in Incheon, she walked in as if it were her own room, her own living room. She set her gaze on one or two points on the wall across the room, looking very confident, acting like as if she is the host. And that kind of arrogance, imperiousness, it doesn't come naturally. It comes from royal training.
We just popped up that picture, and I'll ask Abby to put it up again, because talk about a diplomatic dance is when she and Vice President Pence were at the Olympic opening ceremonies. Tell us the background on that.
You see Vice President Pence, and then to his left, right, in the photo, you see the late Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. So I thought the seating configuration very strange. I watched this live on NBC. And the fact that the North Korean delegation, Kim Yo Jong and the 90-year-old Kim Yong-nam, the titular head of the delegation, the fact that they were seated behind and above Vice President Pence and Mrs. Pence and President and Mrs. Moon Jae-in, President Moon of South Korea, looked a little strange to me, because when President Moon made his entrance, he looked up at Kim Yo Jong and extended his arm very courteously, and they shook hands for the first time. And she was polite, she smiled, but she did not extend her arm downward. she kept her elbow right by her side, whereas the South Korean president extended his arm all the way. And she, smiled, but in South Korea, in Korean culture, when you show respect, especially to an elder, you shake hands often with both hands like this. You cup your left hand over the other person's hand. There was none of that. And I thought, wow, she's quite confident and imperious. And I learned later on by interviewing Fred Warmbier, the father of Otto, the University of Virginia student who visited North Korea and then was detained on false charges and tortured and found to have been killed by North Korea. Fred was on the official Mike Pence delegation. I learned from Mr. Warmbier that this was not by chance or accident. Kim Yo Jong had demanded that she be seated right above the Vice President of the United States, or else she walks. The North Korean delegation goes home. So South Korea was very accommodating of North Korea's, I think, unreasonable demand.
I'm glad you brought up the Warmbier because, as you know, I'm a graduate of the University of Virginia, and that I paid a lot of attention to that poor soul. You helped them with their lawsuit. Could you elaborate on that?
I participated in their lawsuit as an expert witness. So I submitted a written declaration to the district court in Washington, D.C., and there was a hearing in December 2018, and I testified. I took the stand, yes.
So tell us more now about Kim Yo's really intelligence and what her interests are. I guess it's fair to say that she's the propagandist in chief, but how did she get to this position? What was her training? Was it in technology or journalism?
Sure. She was mentioned for the first time in the North Korean media in 2014, in March 2014, but not really identified as the daughter of Kim Jong-il, or her background was not revealed, her relationship with Kim Jong-un and so on. But in truth, she had been running this very powerful ministry. It's called Propaganda and Agitation Department. And the word department belies the centrality, the importance of this government agency. She had been running the Propaganda Agitation Department since 2012. And what that means is she would be signing off on various statements, official documents, and so on, censorship as well, enforcing censorship on her people. And this was the route that her late father took when he was internally declared as the next leader in the 1970s. He came up through the same ranks as a vice director of the Propaganda and Agitation Department. Now, sometime in early 2014, I and many other North Korea watchers noticed this vile, sudden shift into very vicious, personalized attacks on prominent leaders like President Obama, the then South Korean female president Park Geun-hye, and also Judge Michael Kirby, a retired justice in the Australian higher courts, who is the principal drafter of a monumental UN study on human rights in North Korea, published in 2014. And North Korea attacked President Obama, calling him, quote, pardon me, I'm quoting, a wicked black monkey, referring to the female South Korean president repeatedly as a dirty old prostitute, and even referring to Michael Kirby, who's openly gay, as, quote, a disgusting old lecher with a 40-year career in homosexuality, and so on. And although North Korea has always been discourteous toward South Korean leaders, American leaders as well, I thought this kind of vicious, misogynistic, vile, racist, homophobic slur somewhat of a novelty. And I see the same kind of sardonic, vicious, personalized attack, the same kind of cynical, vicious streak in the over 40 written statements that Kim Yo Jong has issued since the onset of COVID in early 2020. I see the same, style, if you will. So those vile attacks in 2014 and 2015 on various leaders have the same kind of signature that I've observed in the 40 or more written statements that she has issued over the past 3 years.
So what is the relationship between the two, the brother and the sister? Is it, I guess, who is the power behind the throne? Who makes the decisions? Ray Termini from Dallas says, does Kim Yo Jong have influence on her brother on major foreign or domestic matters?
Yes, she does. And she keeps emphasizing that, again, this authority that she exercises in running her nation's foreign policy toward the US, South Korea, and others, Russia as well, this authority is vested in her by her brother and the Workers' Party, the Communist Party, and the state. So she's very explicit in trying to tell the world that she has this authority and she's not just issuing empty threats. In a written statement on June 13, 2020, she threatened to blow up a building located just north of the border with South Korea, in North Korea, that was built entirely and maintained entirely with South Korean taxpayer money, the North Korea-South Korea Joint Liaison Office. She said, soon you will see this ugly, useless building gone, and 3 days later, demolished it was. She also, in that same statement, threatened to send troops into the border region as if she were to start a skirmish or a limited attack against the South. About 10 days, 2 weeks later, her brother announced publicly that he's suspending that plan that his sister had warned of, thus coming across as the more restrained, reasonable party. And I think this is a very clever role reversal, whereas in 2018, when Kim Yo Jong visited South Korea, she played the role of the so-called good cop to her brother's bad cop. Now, she's been, well, over the past 3 years, she's been playing the role of the even worse cop to the bad cop that is her brother. And I think this is very clever because by virtue of her identity, a young, photogenic woman, not quite 40, she just turned 36 in September. By virtue of her identity, I think she can get away with more than her surly looking, less photogenic brother. She issued on June 4th, 2020, a written statement at 6:14 a.m. calling on South Korea to pass a new law to criminalize sending leaflets, anti-North Korean regime leaflets, and anything else like toothpastes, toothbrush, pair of socks, a bar of soap, the Bible, $1 notes, and so on that activists send into North Korea. And with alarming alacrity, South Korea's major government ministry, the Unification Ministry, the chief spokesman called for an unscheduled press conference and said, yes, we will work on such a law. Now, had that command or request in writing come from her brother, I'm not sure that South Korea would have responded with such eagerness, but that law was passed.
That's a fascinating story about how quickly, and you go into detail about this in the book, about how quickly South Korea's leadership just basically bowed down.
Well, I mean, it was very unfortunate, and I think the government did not expect this global backlash. The United Nations, various human rights watchdogs, a senior parliamentarian in Britain called this law the gag law, and they were very vocal and critical. But again, had this command come from Kim Jong-un, I'm not so sure South Korea would have acted so dutifully. But being a young, pretty woman, she can get away with a lot than her brother. And I think if she becomes the next face of North Korea's post-provocation peace ploy, charm offensive, and they always go back to a charm offensive. The North Koreans don't escalate indefinitely as if they really want war. She will be the face, the ambassador of the next North Korean charm offensive. And when she says, I want to come to the White House, I want to visit the United Nations in New York, and so on, I think it will be exceedingly difficult, politically speaking, for any US president or administration to say, no, thank you, we're not interested in talking to you, thus coming across as the more petulant party, uninterested in peace. So she's an unprecedented weapon in her nation's diplomatic toolbox.
Let's talk about succession, because every leader of North Korea has been a male. We know it's a very male-dominated patriarchal society. How healthy is Kim Jong-un? And tell us a bit about his daughter as well. There are a lot of questions in that, but give us your thoughts on how all this might evolve.
Well, Kim Jong-un is just optically, visibly, he's morbidly obese, a medical term. He's
heavy drinker, is that true? And a chain smoker.
He's a heavy drinker, and various people, South Korean officials who've met him, US officials have observed that he can put away quite a bit. At the Inter-Korean Summit on April 27th, 2018, between President Moon of South Korea and Kim Jong-un, there was a banquet hosted by the South in the border village, and you could see South Korean principals like the foreign minister, the unification minister, the head of the intelligence agency, the defense minister, standing in line to pour a drink for Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un reportedly downed every single cup that South Koreans poured for him. And he was visibly flushed, red in the face. When he met Vladimir Putin for the first time, which took place on April 25th in 2019 in Vladivostok, Putin uncharacteristically was punctual. He was waiting for Kim Jong-un. The men shook hands. This was around 2:05 p.m. And after a meeting, summit, a banquet, Kim Jong-un, exited. Putin bade Kim Jong-un farewell. It was still light out around 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. And reportedly, Kim Jong-un felt slighted by his host because Putin told Kim that he's on a plane to go to Beijing, China the next day to attend the big Belt Road Initiative conference. And that is usually seen as a diplomatic slight when you have a head of state visiting you. The head of the host nation usually doesn't get on a plane, thus coming across as having things to do, people to meet, while his guest is just a tourist. So Kim Jong-un was unhappy, and he reportedly drank a lot of alcohol that night as well, and showed up almost 3 hours late to his first engagement the next day. So he's a chain smoker. There's a history of heart failure, other ailments in the family, in the father and the grandfather. But again, he's young. He's not quite 40. He'll turn 40 in early January. So he could be around for the next 30 years, 40 years, who knows? But there's also the possibility he might be incapacitated at some point. His children are quite young. He's been parading around his cute daughter since about a year ago, but she's about 12, maybe even 11, clearly pre-pubescent.
And we don't even know her age officially, do we?
No, we don't. And the South Korean intelligence service has said that Kim Jong-un also has a son, but we don't know that for sure either. So my point is, until one of Kim Jong-un's children reaches adulthood, say in 10, 15 years, for the time being, there is no capable candidate to be the next supreme leader, except for the aunt, except for the sister, Kim Yo Jong. And if Kim Yo Jong, say 15, 20 years from now, feels that she's about to be relegated to the role of a mere regent, as we saw with their uncle, Chang Sung-taek, back in 2013, who was branded as a traitor and tortured and killed by the Kim siblings, I think, memories of that wrathful, nipping winter of 2013 will come back. And who's to say whether the auntie or the niece or the nephew, who might strike first? Who knows?
So let's talk for a few minutes about some of the events that are happening right now. And we have a question from Michael Vanderpool, who is with the Connecticut World Affairs Council. And he asks, how do you assess the current threat of nuclear attack from North Korea against Seoul, given the strategic deepening activity between Russia and North Korea? Allegedly, North Korea supplying military armaments to Russia in the war with Ukraine. And how would the current threat assessment compare to times past? And I was reading just a few hours ago that indeed North Korea has provided something like a thousand what was it, 1,000 missiles or whatever to Russia. So
containers,
containers, that's right,
at least.
containers containing
Yes.
a wide variety of armament. So tell us what you see on this issue.
Yeah, it's a concern. It's a concerning development. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really changed the world, not for the better. The old Cold War dynamics of Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang on one side, pitted against the United States and its allies in the region in Northeast Asia, Japan and South Korea on the other side, those dynamics have returned. And North Korea fired over 100 missiles last year alone, and there has not been even a token UN Security Council resolution condemning North Korea, calling for sanctions enforcement against North Korea, even with North Korea's several intercontinental ballistic missile flights last year and this year as well. Russia and China have worked together to block any such efforts within the Security Council by the US or the European Union. So they're brazen, team rogue, and now Putin and Kim need each other. Again, in 2019, when Putin and Kim met for the first time, Putin slighted Kim, but we saw in mid-September, September 13th, when the two leaders met again in the Russian Far East, they exuded an image of a need, and they look happy to be meeting each other. Russia needs from Kim, from North Korea, ammo, ammunition, artillery shells, and so on, even sniper rifles and bullets and so on. North Korea needs from Russia satellite technology, ICBM technology, nuclear-powered submarine technology, and so forth. And Putin even blatantly, brazenly said at the time that he will help North Korea launch satellite, which of course requires ballistic missile technology. And that was, a contradiction of the 10 UN Security Council resolutions condemning North Korea for various breaches, like conducting a nuclear test that Putin had, agreed to in the past. So unfortunately, we're living in a more dangerous world, and I think Putin and Kim are becoming more and more brazen, and I think they're seeking to instill in Washington a gnawing anxiety, continual concern of even greater military collusion between the two despotic states.
What's so ironic about this, though, is that North Korea was put in dire straits, extreme poverty after the breakup of the Soviet Union.
That's right. Soviet subsidies came to an end in the wake of the collapse of the empire. China back then was not so much interested in salvaging the North Korean state. China normalized diplomatic relations with South Korea in August 1992, which was a setback for the North Korean regime. And due to the contradictions of the totalitarian economy, a famine set in. And this is a terrible and unique phenomenon in world history. We've seen famines all throughout human existence, and there are famine-like conditions in many parts of the world, unfortunately, even today. But we've never seen a famine strike an industrialized, urbanized, literate society not engaged in an active war or internal uprising. So, and we probably will never see such an instance again. And since the famine of the mid to late 1990s, North Korea, without fail, is in the top 5, sometimes top 3 nations of the world beset by the most serious food insecurity. Now, we know that the nation is poor, but the regime is filthy rich. They have the vast wealth with which to import food, but they choose not to each year. It's almost as if North Korean state planners set aside this food gap for the international community to fill as donation. So,
put this into dollars, because in the book you do mention how little amount it would take to eradicate or certainly diminish significantly the famine.
Yeah, if Kim Jong-un spent $200 million or $300 million, which is a lot for an individual, but not for a state, even one like North Korea, with which to import food and distributed it equitably, no man, woman, child would be hungry in North Korea. But, they spend billions on missile programs alone, but they choose not to. They import, according to the South Korean government, they spend about 650 million to about 0.7 billion a year on imports of luxury goods, from top shelf alcohol to Mercedes sedans to yachts and so on. But they wouldn't spend, even a fraction of that with which to buy food. So this is a man-made and man-sustained food crisis in North Korea. And, sanctions have a role, yes, a deleterious effect, maybe climate change as well, but it's a strange miracle of nature that climate change stops right at the border without fail each year. The northern border with China and the southern border with South Korea, no one's hardly anyone's, hungry or starving in those two nations, whereas in North Korea, during COVID, we have seen reports of piles of corpses, people starving to death.
So we have a question here from Santa Fe from Ian Dunn. Would Kim Yo Jong be bold enough to remove her brother and take power? If not, why not?
Well, I can only speculate. I mean, when I've watched hundreds of hours of North Korean footage, video clips that have not been shown in South Korea or in the US or other countries. And the two siblings, the brother and sister, seem to genuinely like each other in a brotherly, sisterly kind of, affection. They show such affection even during official engagements, meetings like summit meetings with Donald Trump or with the South Korean leader or the Chinese president. They steal often glimpses of each other, looking across the room at each other for a split second. And then there's a message, like they nod or blink, as if to say that this day is going swimmingly, that everything's, turning out just fine. And they smile. So when I see Kim Yo Jong bringing out her brother's fancy Mont Blanc fountain pen with which to sign a guest book or a document, when I see Kim Yo Jong hold up a crystal ashtray for her brother who's having a smoke outside his train on his way to Vietnam for his second summit meeting with President Trump in February 2019, I don't see a secretarial role. I see more in her the doting, loving sister, not quite the mother figure perhaps, but the loving sibling kind of affection and attention to detail. So I think Kim Jong-un really trusts his sister, recognizes her capabilities. So for now, I think the two need each other, but who knows, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, history is rife with...
Well, after reading your book, I have to say that if I were either one of them, I would certainly look behind my back. So we do have a question from Richard Thibodeau, and I'm glad he asked this question because we do want to talk about the Hanoi summit. And he says, what is your opinion of President Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un and its effect on U.S. foreign policy? And we certainly, I guess you would consider that a failed summit, but let's hear what you have to say.
Well, I think President Trump, when South Korean senior officials came to Washington, to the White House in March 2018, conveying the message, they had just been wined and dined by Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. On Monday, March 5th, 2018, they visited President Trump in the White House that Thursday on March 8th and told the president that Kim Jong-un wishes to have a summit meeting. And Mr. President Trump apparently on the spot said, okay, let's do it. The sooner the better. I thought President Trump was walking into an elaborate trap that the wily North Korean dictator had built for him. Because, again, President Trump said he can size up Kim Jong-un in the first 2 minutes. I don't think President Trump at the time knew much about North Korean strategy or history and tended to patronize the funny-looking North Korean dictator. So with the first summit in Singapore in June 2018, I still had misgivings, but I withheld judgment. But when I saw the long press conference, solo press conference by President Trump, I realized that this was really a grave development because President Trump announced that he would suspend defensive military drills between the US and South Korean forces, annual routine military exercises that had been going on for decades. He also, when asked about human rights in North Korea, President Trump ended up defending Kim Jong and said, it's rough over there, but it's rough in many countries around the world. And he's a tough cookie and so on. So I thought those were unfortunate developments. And during the second summit in Vietnam in February 2019, President Trump was very distracted. On the night, the eve of his real summit meeting with Kim, President Trump, according to his national security advisor, John Bolton, in his memoir, stayed up most of the night watching on TV a congressional hearing in which his erstwhile lawyer and confidant, Michael Cohen, testified against President Trump. So I think President Trump was a little distracted, quite distracted. And when he couldn't reach an agreement with Kim, basically Kim offered the same dead horse that his father had offered many times, which was to shut down a major nuclear reactor in Yongbyon, north of Pyongyang, in return for lifting all sanctions since 2016. Before 2016, there was no real US sanctions law against North Korea. And UN sanctions on North Korea were very weak before 2016. So I think President Trump made the right call in not giving away the farm and lifting all sanctions on North Korea for North Korea selling the same dead horse again. But I think that kind of snub, Trump got on his plane, Air Force One, and left while Kim Jong-un was left in Vietnam, with another 2-day itinerary. That was probably the most egregious, the greatest public humiliation that Kim Jong-un has ever suffered. So the train ride back home, some 70 hours long, couldn't have been a pleasant, happy ride back home.
What happened to the coterie of aides that were part of that trip? And did Kim Yo Jong suffer any consequences from this, failed summit and where the leader was humiliated?
So, no, Kim Yo Jong remained unscathed on the train and thereafter. But the point man for the summit, who was the former North Korean ambassador in Spain, Kim Hyuk-chol, Mr. Kim, who actually visited President Trump in the White House in January that year, about a month away from the summit meeting in Vietnam. He has been reportedly purged, meaning killed. And I've heard this from a former senior North Korean official as well recently. But the entire top officials, the foreign minister and so on, during the trade ride back home were punished. And several have been sent to work, to hard labor in factories or in mines and so on. And several have never been seen again before. And there have been varying degrees of punishment, but the sister was not punished because, again, I think Kim Jong-un really depends on his sister for advice and so on. And Kim Yo Jong this year has issued many statements supporting Russia since January this year, saying that North Korea stands in the same trenches with the heroic military and people of the Russian Federation. And that Kim Jong-un said, in his meeting with Putin in September, that Kim Jong-un, North Korea stands by Russia in the anti-imperialist struggle.
So how is Kim Jong-un introducing, or how did he, I should say, introduce the population to the importance of his sister?
Well, it's strange, but not so strange. It's North Korea being North Korea. North Korea has never officially mentioned that Kim Yo Jong is the sister of the supreme leader. I mean, people all know that she is. But again, her formal title is that of not a very low-ranking official, but not a very high-ranking principal type either. But people know that she is, the co-despotess or the deputy supreme leader. So there have been reports coming out of North Korea since the spring of 2021 that she had the authority to order executions, to have people killed for looking at her funny, for getting on her nerves. And that kind of prerogative to play God, to, on a whim, kill, purge officials, that has been the prerogative of the supreme leader. And we've never seen a female powerful person, claim that power. So I think Kim Jong-un has given his sister, a broad authority, a real power to be more like him than any other high-ranking officials in the land. And again, this speaks to the trust, the high trust that Kim Jong-un has in his young, capable sister.
Tell us about the significance of this picture that we just put up.
So you'll see the horses, Kim Jong-un's horse and his sister's horse have a head stole with the royal insignia, the five-pointed star, and that is the emblem of the dynasty, of the family. And no other horse has that, not even the horse of Kim Jong-un's wife, Lee Sol-ju. This was a climb up Mount Baekdu in October 2019. Kim Jong-un returned the next month in November with a much larger retinue, including his wife, and his wife's horse does not have that star. That is only for the direct line descendants of the founder of the North Korean state, Kim Il-sung. And by publicly conveying to the North Korean people, over 20 photos of Kim Jong-un, many of them with his sister, riding the horse with the five-pointed star on its head, on the horse's head, I see that as an implicit message that the role of the sister will be elevated as perhaps heir, unnamed, but real, heir or successor, just in case. And indeed, with the onset of COVID, just a month or two later, we've seen this rapid elevation of Kim Yo Jong by Kim Jong-un himself.
So here in Santa Fe, Sig Hecker, who is the director emeritus of the Los Alamos National Laboratory, wrote a book, came out about a year ago, called Hinge Points. And one of his arguments is that the US and North Korea have consistently missed opportunity, hinge points, misunderstood each other. Do you agree with Dr. Hecker that perhaps there were opportunities and that one of the reasons that North Korea has put so much emphasis on its nuclear capacity is to have a seat at the table?
Yes, with the caveat that contrary to the public perception out there that North Korea is the party reacting to verbal or stimuli coming out of Washington, whatever the mighty Americans say or do pushes North Korea to take more forceful action. I see North Korea as having greater agency. I see North Korea as the more proactive party. Going back to the Korean War, it was Kim Il-sung's war. He persuaded Stalin and Mao to give him the green light to invade the South. He was not a puppet of Stalin. Stalin and Mao really didn't want to risk a potential war with the US just 5 years after the end of the Second World War. So North Korea has been the driver in many cases. And sure, there have been missed opportunities and many mistakes made on both sides. But I think North Korea really, of course, wanted to nuke up because the US threatened North Korea with nuclear attacks during the Korean War, and saw the great utility of having a nuclear arsenal. And they've been trying to build a bomb since the mid-1960s. And over the past 30 years, they've built several, as we know. So this is a great commitment to building the bomb, acquiring a credible nuclear arsenal. And I'm not sure that the US or any other powers could have really prevented North Korea from acquiring this kind of power capability at some point in the past. Perhaps they could have, but I don't see clear and convincing evidence that the US could have, but due to a series of mistakes or unfortunate developments, missed that opportunity.
Let me bring in Matthew Fuller from the Asia Society Texas Center in Houston. He says, what role do mobile phones and social media play in North Korea's society? How effective is the regime at monitoring, censoring these technologies? And he asks, can they continue to do so? Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. It's an important question. Over the past at least 10, probably 15, or even close to 20 years, according to various North Korean defectors, and in South Korea, there are over 34,000 North Koreans who have resettled in the South. Now, that's like half a football stadium in terms of the audience. You know, it's not a huge crowd, but it's not insignificant a pool either. Before the onset of the famine in the 90s, very few North Koreans had dared to escape, but the famine drove them out of their country, and many have come and resettled in the South, in the prosperous, pleasant Korean state south of the border. The majority of these new settlers in the South from the North say they've been exposed to foreign media, meaning South Korean pop songs or TV shows, or listening to Voice of America or Radio Free Asia and so on, which piqued their interest. Most don't say that was the pivotal reason for them to leave. I think the primary reason is, search of a livelihood, a better life, or just, life to live. But it was a factor in their decision to escape. So the outside world, the US government, Congress should be doing more to disseminate information into North Korea. It's a universal human right, the right to share, impart, information through any kind of medium across borders. That's enshrined in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the Congress should be appropriating more money for Voice of America and other such organizations. The South Korean government, the Japanese government, the EU should be doing a lot more to send information into North Korea.
Instead of leaflets, I think we should drop your book.
Well, a reviewer in the Wall Street Journal, Melanie Kirkpatrick, said that the contents of my book should be broadcast by radio into North Korea so that the North Korean people know just how systematically and cruelly oppressed and deprived they are.
Quite seriously, do you know if your book has been picked up by any embassy around the world or been read by anyone in the North Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
No, I don't know that, but we know North Korea has maintained about 50 foreign missions, consulates and embassies around the world and in many European nations. So I think it would probably be a basic assignment for North Koreans abroad to at least buy a copy or two so that they can check it out.
Let me ask you this, because it just came out, a week or two ago, that North Korea is closing a number of its embassies. Why?
I don't know, but this is a recent development, a new development, and I think North Korea has become so capable in terms of cyber heist, stealing money in cryptocurrency and so forth from corporations and government agencies, that North Korea probably deems such illegal activities to be more lucrative than the cost of maintaining a foreign mission abroad. So I think these are measures to make more money by spending less.
Well, I have to say, Dr. Lee, your book and learning about the sisters sent chills down my spine. And by our large audience tonight, there certainly is a great deal of interest. Again, many congratulations on the book. We look forward to seeing the movie in probably 2 years or so, and wishing you continued success. And to all of you, thank you for being part of our program tonight. Happy Thanksgiving. And let me remind you that I'll be back on December 8th at, let me get the time right, at 11 a.m. Central Time, talking to Tom Standage. He's the executive editor and editor of The World Ahead, the annual publication of The Economist, where he will tell us what they got right in last year's edition and what they see coming up in 2024. So thanks again for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good evening.